these stories of where I've been, and now I got to where I am. But these stories don't mean anything when you've got no one to tell them to. It's true, I was made for you. I climbed across the mountain tops, swam all across the ocean blue. I crossed over lands and I broke all rules, and baby I broke them all for you. Oh, because even when I was flat broke, you made me feel like a million bucks. You do. I was made for you. You see the smile that's on my mouth, it's hiding the words that don't come out. And all of my friends who think that I'm blessed, they don't know my head is a mess. No, they don't know who I really am, and they don't know what I've been through like you do. And I was made for you. All of these lines across my face tell you the story of who I am. So many stories of where I've been, and now I got to where I am. Oh, but these stories don't mean anything when you've got no one to tell them it's true. I was made for you. Oh yeah, it's true that I was made for you.
Good morning. Wasn't the sun lovely yesterday? Just put me in a good mood. My name is Laura Snow, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of this congregation. Welcome to you all. Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Elkhart is a welcoming community, encouraging religious freedom, nurturing individual spiritual and ethical growth, celebrating diversity, and promoting a just and sustainable world. And that is our mission statement. We're DEI to the max. If you would like to learn more about this fellowship, please look at our website at uufe.org and join us after the service today for coffee, tea, maybe some treats. For the listening enjoyment of all, we ask at this time to please turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. And if you need hearing support, please see the gentleman at our sound desk in the back and they can help you. Thank you. For about the last 2.5 years, it has been customary for the board president, which is me, to get up and do a little summary of our most recent monthly board meeting. Well, the reason for doing that was transparency. We wanted the board to be open with everybody in the congregation and to make sure that everybody knew what was going on. It was to build trust with everybody in the congregation. Times are changing. Here's another change. I'm not going to do that today. What I am going to do is let everybody know where they can find the most recent meeting minutes and let you know who's on the board so that you can converse with them directly if you have concerns or suggestions. To start with, the meeting minutes are published and they're on the bulletin board back by the office, along with the monthly treasurer's report. That's also very important if you want to take a look at what we're doing fiscally. The meeting minutes should be up on our uufe.org, so you can go to the website and read through this month's meeting minutes. The board consists of myself, Chuck Bauer, Taylor, I'm drawing a blank, Chadwick, thank you, Linda Gill, Oksana Werbiansky, and Ken Claiborne is our treasurer. So those are the folks that are on the board that you can chat with at any point. Our emails are all in our directory. I would also like to introduce our Committee on Shared Ministry group, for they're the ones that will be handling concerns between congregants and the minister. And that would be Terry Mark, Dwight Fish, and Katrina Konopinski. Thank you. There she is. They make up the members of our COM group, Committee on, its short version is Committee on Ministry. Okay. And they will be joining board members up here periodically to do the morning announcements because they're that important to the function and the health of our congregation. So that's all I'm going to say this morning. If you want to know what we covered in the board meeting, please chat afterwards with me or any of the other board members, or take a peek at the posted meeting minutes. Thank you.
Here in Elkhart, we reside on the original indigenous land of the Potawatomi and Miami tribes. I have but one announcement this morning. You've heard about the Ui auction coming back on April 5th, and there is a reminder for instructions on how to list donations that will be in the weekly update email. We ring the gong 3 times, once for those who came before us and made a place for us. Once for those who are here now. And once for those who will follow and build on the dream. Our chalice lighting this morning was written by Vance Bass. Every day brings struggle. Every day brings joy. Every day brings us the opportunity to ease the struggle of another and to be the joy in another's life. on the gift of this day. May this flame remind us to carry our light to each other and to the world. Please join me in speaking our covenant in unison. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant. We have a story today brought to us by our speaker, whom I'll introduce later. Anybody here ever heard of Charlotte's Web? Yeah? Well, that's not what I'm reading, but it was written by the same person that wrote Charlotte's Web, E.B. White. And it's a story about a trip taken to the zoo. On a warm, miserable morning last week, I went up to the Bronx Zoo to see the moose calf and to break in a new pair of black shoes. I encountered better luck than I had bargained for. The cow moose and her young one were standing near the wall of the deer park below the monkey house, and in order to get a better view, I strolled down to the lower end of the park by the brook. The path there is not much traveled. As I approached the corner where the brook trickles under the wire fence, I noticed a red deer getting to her feet. Beside her, on legs that were just learning their business, was a spotted fawn, as small and perfect as a trinket seen through a reducing glass. They stood there, mother and child, under a gray beech whose trunk was engraved with dozens of hearts and initials. Stretched on the ground was another fawn, and I realized that the doe had just finished giving birth to twins. The second fawn was still wet, unrisen. Here was a scene of rare sylvan splendor in one of my 5 favorite burrows, and I couldn't have asked for more. Even my new shoes seemed to be working out all right and weren't hurting much. The doe was only a couple of feet from the wire fence, and I sat down on a rock at the edge of the footpath to see what sort of start young fawns get in the deep fastness of Mattel Bronx. The mother, mildly resentful of my presence and dazed from her labor, raised one foot and stamped primly. Then she lowered her head, picked up the afterbirth, and began dutifully to eat it, allowing it to swing crazily from her mouth as though it were a bunch of withered beet greens. From the monkey house came the loud, insane hooting of some captious primate, filling the whole woodland with a loud roar. As I watched, the sun broke weakly brightened the rich red of the fawns and kindled their white spots. Occasionally, a sightseer would appear and wander aimlessly by, but of all who passed, none was aware that anything extraordinary had just occurred. "Look at the kangaroos!" a child cried, and he and his mother stared sullenly at the deer and then walked on. In a few moments, the second twin gathered all his legs and all his ingenuity and arose to stand for the first time, sniffing the mysteries of a park for captive deer. The doe, in recognition of his achievement, quit her work and began to dry him, running her tongue against the grain and paying particular attention to the key points. Meanwhile, the first fawn tiptoed toward the shallow brook in little stops and goes and started across. He paused midstream to make a slight contribution, as a child does in bathing. Then, while his mother watched, he continued across, gained the other side, selected a hiding place, and lay down under a skunk cabbage leaf next to the fence. In perfect concealment, his legs folded neatly under him. Without actually going out of sight, he had managed to disappear completely in the shifting light and shade. From somewhere a long way off, a 12 o'clock whistle sounded. I hung around a while, but he never budged. Before I left, I crossed the brook myself, just outside the fence, knelt, reached through the wire, and tested the truth of what I had once heard, that you can scratch a new fawn between the ears without startling him. You can indeed. The children may now go to religious education. And we will be singing hymn 346. Come sing a song with me. Led, of course, by our own Steve Craig.
Stand if you're willing and able, and let's sing 346. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and rose in the Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and rose in the Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and rose in the Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and rose in the
This week, the fourth Sunday of the month, We recognize the joys and sorrows of our global community. All that is shared today comes from beyond ourselves, whether from the other side of the county or the other side of the hemisphere. These events affect us, even if indirectly, by impacting the world we live in. This practice keeps us conscious of events outside of UUFE, to bring and keep our awareness of losses, gifts, pain, and beauty from beyond our beloved community, and allows us to bear witness. If there's something you would like to share, please raise your hand and I will bring the mic to you. Briefly speak the event or situation you are calling to our attention. And if you have questions about anything that is shared, please speak to the speaker after the service. Please do be brief and hold personal sharings for third Sundays. I would like to share that from the other side of the county, there was a rally in support of immigrants from the Hispanic community and others, and well over 100 people were gathered there, including 4 members of our congregation.
I was there too.
I didn't see you. 5 members.
5 members. And that's what I was going to say.
I'm really disappointed in the governments who force people out of their homelands to create illegal immigrants. And it's really tragic, whether it's in the Middle East or South America.
I had a very positive awakening or thought this morning that all things pass.
There is still war in the Middle East, of course. And there was a continued release of hostages and prisoners between Israel and Hamas this past week.
And there's still war in Ukraine, and they were not invited to come to the peace talks? That's kind of weird to me. Also, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Goshen, which is across the county, is having a fundraiser for the youth of Ukraine, and they will be selling pisanki, which are Ukrainian Easter eggs. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're very ornate and beautiful. That's all.
May light and warmth come to all those who need and bring it. May we ever grow in our awareness of the needs and joys of our world and our care of it. Recently, the board reviewed those not-for-profits with whom we share our Sunday cash offerings, and the decision was made to include a particular organization that is not strictly local, as had been our practice. But it is an organization whose work we need more than ever before, whose focus and dedicated efforts reflect our own values of justice and defending the rights of all people. Today, our offering will be shared with the American Civil Liberties Union of Indiana. Let us give with gratitude and receive with hope. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today, Ken Smith. Ken has lived in Michiana for over 30 years. He grew up in the St. Louis area, went to college in Missouri and Iowa, and taught writing and literature at IUSB until his retirement just a few years ago. He's one of the 4 founding members of WVPE's Michiana Chronicles weekly radio essay series, where he's told about 200 stories now, since the series began in 2001. He has the good fortune of having been here a number of times before, because although it's his first time in our pulpit, he happens to be married to April Ladinsky, who members of this congregation know from her talks here, as well as from her own appearances on radio and elsewhere. Ken also writes the occasional poem and posts new examples of his photography on Instagram a few times each week. Ken, welcome.
It's really a pleasure to have been invited. Thank you. And to have been here before. And I'm going to take note of the time. There's a hook. Okay. So my topic is Twice Told Tales. I'm going to go through a handful of informal chapters about different aspects of stories. Ordinarily, when I used to have a classroom of students and we had a topic that was in part so familiar, I would sometimes begin by saying, well, what do we already know about stories? But I have a feeling if I said that now that I wouldn't actually need to speak at all, because you all would cover the territory very well. So I hope you'll excuse me for not beginning that way. But the first chapter is about what's at stake in stories. My thesis is that when we tell stories, we're doing the upkeep work, the maintenance work on the meaning of our lives. And so we should do a good job, if at all possible. So what makes a better story for the enrichment of our own self and of our community and wider culture? What's at stake in storytelling? What do we stand to gain or lose? Those are some things that I'll attempt to touch upon. But my overview is that stories help us imagine another person and what we have in common. Stories help us imagine a bigger version of ourselves and how we might possibly find that bigger version of ourselves. And there's a beautiful passage by James Baldwin where he talks about the struggles as a young person and feeling very alone in a dangerous city at a dangerous time in American life, where, among other things, racism threatened him and his people regularly, and his identity was a threat to others for reasons that he couldn't master. And he said that reading books from long, long ago, hearing stories from far places and far times, taught him the miraculous insight that he wasn't alone and that he had struggled in ways that others have struggled. And I would add one more preliminary note, is that we tell a lot of stories over and over and over again. I considered asking April to estimate the number of times I've told a certain story since we met in 1988, but I thought it might be embarrassing to get the answer. So you can ask her later if you want. I'm going to tell that story today. But we retell those stories as a way of continuing to gauge the meaning of the journey we're on, I would say. And the song by Brandi Carlile that was playing was the lyrics on the screen as everyone was settling in. I think I hadn't known it before. It's easy to find on YouTube. And the lyrics, I think, tell us something about stories. It's not just a beautiful song, but in the first lines, the singer talks about the lines across her face and the stories of who she's been and where she's been and how she got there. And she says, but these stories don't mean anything when you've got no one to tell them to. And so the stakes, storytelling is not just to make sense inside myself, inside each of us, but it is a way of building the bond we need with others. In that sense, the story is absolutely central to our hope. And the traditions of storytelling are central to our hopes in life. And I really like that about that song. And whenever I do come out here, usually to hear April, I look forward to seeing Lee Burdorf, who is the founding producer of that radio show from 2001. I think he and I met in the spring of 2001, and the show started formally in October. And I sat in the minor league ballpark next to Lee a few years ago during a baseball game, and it crossed my mind that Lee used to be an announcer for radio, for baseball, as well as, I think, basketball, right? And I was curious, what it would be like to hear Lee announce a baseball game. And I said, Lee, there's a baseball game here, and I'm sitting next to a baseball announcer. I wonder what that's like. And in a sweet and happy way, Lee obliged me by announcing the next half inning in the style he had built up as a professional years before. And one thing that comes to mind is baseball should not work on radio. That's crazy. It goes slowly most of the time, and then all of a sudden, and then it's not. And a lot of things happen the same over and over and over again. It's just I hope maybe Lee will talk later on in the refreshment room about why it's possible for baseball to work on radio. But there's something my theory is that we have a hunger to piece together images and stories, and that a professional announcer of baseball knows how to feed that hunger with images and stories and vivid language, and how to spark our imagination. And so that's one of the beauties of radio, but also of stories. And then one more preliminary note. Some of you may have spent some time reading the Czechoslovakian author Václav Havel, who was a protester and a playwright and was sent to prison by the communist government behind the Iron Curtain for his activities. And then later, after the Velvet Revolution, he became president of the country, which is a kind of a miraculous story. And he has an essay called The Power of the Powerless, because a lot of people feel powerless and a lot of people are more or less powerless. And the power of the powerless, in that essay, he speculates on the hidden powers of the powerless. But the reason I bring it up is because on the first page he says, well, they got names for us. He says the government here behind the Iron Curtain calls us traitors and criminals and puts us in jail. So those are two names that are given to us. But the folks in Western Europe and in the United States call us dissidents because of we stand in conflict with the communist government. But he says on the first page, but that's not a word I would choose because I'm not fond of anybody telling us our name. I would like us to say what our name is. And as the pages go by and he tells stories about life behind the Iron Curtain, he eventually says, what we were trying to do is live in truth, to understand truth as best we could and to live in it. And if that caused us to look like a dissident, so be it. But that's not what we were doing first. Our first task was not dissenting. Our first task was living in truth. And if that caused us to be a criminal or a traitor, well, that's a harder thing to say, so be it too. But anyway, to say so be it to the Soviets. Anyway, Havel said, it's best to try to name yourself through your own experience and your own reflections and your community's life of trading stories together. So those are some of the things I think are at stake in stories. Now I'd like to tell a really bad story. Because part of our problem in telling stories is that sometimes they're terrible. So April and I went to the movies several years ago. You all, I'm sure, remember that when you go see a kid movie, the previews will be kid movie previews. And if you go see a superhero movie, the previews will be superhero movies, and so forth. So we were going to see a movie about studious nerds wishing they had lived a little more. Imagine April and me going to see a movie about studious nerds. But there was a real shortage of previews that they could share about studious nerds. That's not the main thing Hollywood makes movies about. So they showed something a little bit like that, and then they moved on, and they started showing previews of horror movies. So, okay, there were 2 horror movies. In the first preview, something ominous had gotten into the dark house. Don't go down those stairs, man. The house is slowly turned to rubble around the 2 heroes. This is all in the preview. Will they ever get out of that basement alive? That's the question. And in the second preview, second horror movie, something dangerous has gotten into the dark house. Don't go up those stairs to the second floor, man. The house is slowly being turned to rubble around them. Will they ever get out of this kitchen alive? So those are how the 2 previews began. And I was actually kind of grateful because superhero movie previews, they usually destroy a beautiful city in the world in the preview, which says terrible things about our culture. But anyway, in these 2 previews, finally, one character in each one was poised to escape. In the first preview, after long being hunted by some vague but malevolent creature, a young woman crawls pathetically out of a shadowy pile of furniture and studs and wallboard, jumble of all these things, suddenly to be grabbed by the ankles and dragged back into the darkness, screaming and clawing the floor with her fingernails. In the second preview, after long being hunted by some vague but malevolent creature, a young man crawls pathetically out of a shadowy pile of cabinets and studs and wallboard, suddenly to be grabbed by the ankles and dragged back into the darkness, screaming and clawing the floor with his fingernails. So those are the 2 previews. You get the picture of the story. So they're made up of entirely stock materials. We've heard every aspect of them before. If they ask a question, if there's suspense, well, there is suspense. Will they get out? Well, you know, 1 or 2 of the good guys will get out. You're pretty sure about that. So the question is not an interesting question, and we know the answer to it ahead. So the suspense is not interesting. The question asked is not interesting. the materials are cliches. So all around us are well-told, expensively told stories full of nonsense. Shakespeare said, "It is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." So one thing story needs to do is ask a worthy question. So, happily, we have a choice in the matter. I was listening to some patriotic music recently. Kate Smith, God Bless America. I'll refresh our memory of the lyrics. God bless America, land that I love, stand beside her and guide her, through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam, God bless America, our homes, my home sweet home. And then I turned to Ray Charles. He sang America the Beautiful. Also features the scenery. But if you look up Ray Charles on YouTube, he never started with the verse about the scenery. He always started the verse about the work that needs to be done to deserve this place that has been given. So when he sings, the first verse is, "O beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine," and so forth. So in the first song, America is a beautiful gift. In the second song, is America is a beautiful gift of very similar beauties, but it requires heroes and the refinement of our gold, the gold that we might contain. So in other words, whatever the story is, with very similar materials, it can be told a different way. And that's one of the great adventures, is to tell the story a different way. So let's talk briefly about suspense. I'm going to read a story that is 15 words long, but I'm going to attempt to read it in a way that allows us to think for a second about suspense. So I'm only going to read it, I'm going to read it in 4 pieces, even though it's only 15 words long. Are you ready? Don't doze off, because this is the first 3 words. After I learned. Now, if I were in a classroom where I could inflict obligations on students, I would ask somebody to speak now and talk about that. But I'll speak. To me, there must be something to be learned coming forward. Could be many, many things. What did the speaker learn? Well, let's see. Shall we continue? 3 more words. We'll be up to 6. After I learned the secret handshake. Well, that's curious. I've heard of clubs with secret handshakes, but I've never been invited to be a member of one that I know of. But they're out there, and they've got some kind of intrigue they go through. They've got some hidden mission. After I learned the secret handshake of, well, whose secret handshake? After I learned the secret handshake of the partners in misery. Well, that's a bit of a switch, isn't it? What are the partners in misery going to do? They've only got 4 words to do it in. But if they deserve their name, well, they're going to do something. And I bet I could stop here and you all could write the last 4 words yourself. But anyway, we need a story to have suspense, and it needs to be not predictable suspense. So I hope that the next 4 words are not predictable, and that they raise a question that we could at least think about. So, after I learned the secret handshake of the partners in misery, I saw it everywhere. That poem is a bummer. to me anyway. But I wrote it, so there you go. After I learned the secret handshake of the partners in misery, I saw it everywhere. I see that a lot of time has gone by. All right. So, you tell the story, imply a question that you think is worth spending time on. Use suspense. Suspense leads to a question. But what if you tell the story in a completely different set of words? Just a few weeks ago, I ran across a different version of the poem I wrote in 1978, let's say, by a completely different author, translated from the Arabic, and it's called Demons. I read in a book the following piece of wisdom. He who remains silent in the face of injustice is a mute demon, end quote. I went out into the streets and saw demons everywhere. That's a depressing poem too. But it's interesting to think, okay, so in one poem, there are these conspirators with their hidden activities and their secret handshake. So they're doing something. And in the other poem, there are people who are just being quiet. When I was a kid in Catholic school, we were taught by people like Sister James Louise that there are two kinds of sins. There are sins of commission, things you commit, that you do, and things of omission, things that you just fail to do. And so one thing about telling that little story two completely different ways is that in one, it invites us to reflect on acting for malevolent purposes. And the other, it invites us to think about omitting to act against malevolent purposes. Just by telling the story a little differently, the reflections that open up are transformed. So if you're telling a story that you've told many times before, take the freedom of it to tell it a completely different way and see what happens to the reflections that you have available to you. So we heard E.B. White earlier about the birth of the two deer in the park. That's a nice example of techniques to steal from storytellers. You know, he says, I was at the park, I was at the zoo, I was at the deer area, the monkey house was up here, there was a brook down here. I went to go see the moose calf, but look at this. And something wonderful has happened in the meantime that it was not scheduled. And so it's a great reminder. Don't just tell depressing stories about secret handshakes. Capture the wonders. We all know about such things. E.B. White wrote elsewhere in a beautiful essay called The Ring of Time, as a writing person or secretary, I have always felt charged with the safekeeping of all unexpected items of worldly or unworldly enchantment, as though I might be held personally responsible if even a small one were to be lost. That's a different kind of story we can preserve and save and share with each other. And in grim times, it's pretty good, pretty important. Okay, when I was young, in chemistry class, there was a scale for measuring the ingredients, and it had two trays, and those two trays were suspended by wires to a cross beam, and the cross beam was pivoted on an upright. Anyone seen these? A two-tray balance? I don't think they use them anymore. And you put a weight in this tray, and it goes down, and you put the chemicals in this tray until it matches the weight, and now you know what amount of reactant you're about to put into your experiment. Otherwise, you're just stirring soup. But if you measure the ingredients, so for me as a writer and as a person who likes to reflect on experience, I find it useful to think about the two-tray balance. In this tray, I'm going to put some idea words, and they're going to be ponderously heavy because I went to grad school. Okay, I'm going to put some idea words over here, and the trays are going to go like this. And then I'm going to say, okay, what about, what experiences can I put in the other tray? And I think of an old story or a new story, and I try to get them to come into a relationship where the idea words and the story are somehow felt to be equivalent. And if I do that, they come together eventually. And then I remember, oh, I know something actually more happened that day. And I put a little more over here, and this starts getting heavier. And then I say, well, I better add some more thinking on the thinking side and try to bring them back into balance. And so storytellers can reflect on the moral or the unstated moral of their stories using the two-tray balance as a thinking tool. So think about Rosa Parks. She refused to sit down in the back of the bus that day. That's the story. What do you put over here? Well, let's say, if you're brave enough, you can fight injustice, and injustice can be defeated. And then you remember, oh, it took a long time for those court cases to go through. So you got to put something more in the idea side. Well, if you're brave enough and you've got good lawyers and people are contributing to your cause, and the justices, the judges who hear your cases, they are open to justice being applied in a new place, then yes, the world will bend toward justice. And then you say, well, brave enough. She had training in nonviolent protest. People got together and helped each other figure out how to do this, how to be brave enough, and how to have nonviolent protest, and how to not end up in a punching match with somebody. And you've got to be trained with allies who have worked together on thinking about the work that justice requires, and so forth. Anyway, so that's a quick example from a familiar story of how you start telling the story and you have to make the ideas stronger. And if the ideas keep getting stronger and the story keeps getting stronger, the two trays stay in balance and your story becomes more and more meaningful. Okay. Well, one thing I love about the sheet, one thing I admire about this sheet is that it has some confessions of articles of faith. I went to a talk at Notre Dame not long ago, and the author, John Green, I think he said to himself, I'm going to be speaking to an audience substantially of Catholics, Roman Catholics, and he said to himself, I am myself a Roman Catholic. And he looked at the historical moment, and he gave a talk whose main idea, I think, was, in our faith tradition as Roman Catholics, he was saying, there is, if we keep digging and attending to our faith tradition, there are reasons to reject fatalism in this grim time, which is a beautiful message to tell to a room full of Roman Catholics. And I suspect that in many other faith traditions, a similar message could be composed. There are reasons in our faith tradition to reject fatalism in this grim time. So I guess I'm not going to tell the story that April was going to tell you I had told 500 times already. So let me leave. No. It involves hiking in Alaska in June, going over a mountain pass, coming down the other side, rain and slush everywhere. Me and my buddy trying to avoid going to college, so we were in Alaska. Soaking wet, our boots wet, coming down the mountainside, snow, snow, it's June. Why are we walking in snow in June? This is supposed to be a cool trip for two 19-year-old guys to avoid college. Walking down the hill, finally looking around, one of us noticed, wow, we're not going downhill anymore. In fact, this is an exceedingly flat place. This is unnaturally flat landscape full of mushy snow we're walking on. And you know what happens next? Yes, we break through the ice and drown. Or we consult our map and see, oh, there's a lake over to the side of the trail. And we were walking on frozen ice, or melting lake ice. And we made a guess where the edge was, and we took what we thought was the shortest route to the edge. And when we got there, we could see the land starting to rise up, and as we got very, very close, there was a yard of open water between us and the shore. And we had our 40-pound packs on. And the meaning of that story has eluded me for a long time. And if I hadn't already gone way over, I would have speculated about it with you for a while. But I've been speculating about the meaning of that story for myself for my entire life, and so my parting words are, that's what stories are for. They are for speculating about the meaning of our lives for our whole life.
Thank you, Ken. This is a group that enjoys speculating. And we'll now join together in singing hymn number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life.
Stand if you're willing and able, and let's sing number 86. Spirit, blessed Spirit of my life, give me strength through stress and strife.
I'm sure Ken will be willing to address questions and thoughts afterwards in the gathering place. Let us extinguish the chalice together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we gather together again. Our benediction comes from John Brigham. Let us go our ways now, knowing not the answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than we know. Amen. Blessed be. Go in peace.